We are here at the AREA Leadership Conference, and I'm delighted to have join us Dr. Brad McRae.
Thank you,
Welcome,
Elaine.
Brad.
Wonderful to be here.
Brad is the director of the Atlantic Leadership Development Institute. He is a keynote speaker, a presenter, and an author of 10 books on leadership, presenting, and negotiating. And one of the books we're very familiar with here is 7 Strategies of Master Leaders. And today we're going to be talking about tipping point leadership. So Brad, the most obvious first question would be, what is tipping point leadership?
The idea behind tipping point leadership comes from epidemiology. So if you think recently there was the Ebola crisis in Africa, and there were 3 cases. Had they stopped it at those 3 cases, that would have ended it. On the other hand, in India, there was 1 case of polio. They inoculated 4.2 million people, 3 days, $200 million, and it stopped it. So the tipping point is where things either proceed forward or not. And it's up to leaders to know how to put that together and make it work for us rather than against us.
That's fascinating. So can you give any other examples of where you've seen that in action?
Sure. I think one of the most famous examples had to do with the designated driver program, which didn't exist in North America. And there's an epidemiologist at Harvard named Jay Winston, and he wanted to bring that program here, but he had no funding. So he contacted 3 television networks, and he asked for 5 seconds of their time, not in a commercial, but in the program. So it was The Cosby Show, it was LA Law, and it was Cheers. And there was a heartthrob lawyer in LA Law, and he had too much to drink, and he called and had somebody pick him up. So over a number of times, they kept saying designated driver, designated driver, designated driver. After 3 years, 90% of the population knew what a designated driver was. 37% of the teenagers signed up with Oprah. And I know from watching my kids, they get it. Yeah. I mean, it certainly isn't what happened when I was their age.
That's very true.
Yeah.
And that's true for my kids, I would confer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, there's a couple of success stories on tipping point leadership. Are there some places that you think it particularly needs to be applied these days?
Absolutely. There has to be a couple of changes, as long as we're talking about young people. One is texting and driving. And the other is there are too many young students who die of alcohol poisoning. And so we've got to stop that. And they're looking at ways with technology that they can actually, if you're texting while you're driving, they can pick that up. And then you would get a fine right away. The other is in Florida, for people who drive under the influence, they have to have a pink license plate on their car. So there's a social stigma attached to it, which is one of the reasons that it's cultural now in Scandinavia. It's just hardly ever done. And there are also big sanctions. So your car is taken away immediately. You can lose your car for a year, and you pay a fine commensurate with your income. So it's both the proactive, that this is something that isn't done. We want to protect our children. But then there's also the sanctions. But you don't necessarily have to have that, but that's how tipping point works. The other example is William Bratton, who took over the subway system in New York. And it was a mess. And so you want to take resources and bring about a change. Well, there were 3 stations that were having most of the problems, but the police were at every single place, and they were dressed as police. So they concentrated on the places where there was the most crime, and then they did something absolutely wonderful. They had bus busters. So they took women who were on welfare, and they trained them how to do all the paperwork, because it took the average police person 14 hours to fill out the paperwork. Because, you know, why would they want to do that when they can go after a master criminal? And so they would be at this place, they would do all of these arrests, and these women would have it done in 2 hours. So we have better policing, we have criminals being stopped early, And that's one of the things that changed New York from one of the most dangerous cities in North America to one of the safest.
Very thoughtful leadership. But
Very, very thoughtful.
Yeah, yeah. Now, in your presentation, you talk about the 4 hurdles. What do you mean by that?
Okay, if I can give an example. I do volunteer work in Jamaica with a charity called Swim Jamaica for inner city children, and they learn how to swim. And I just help fund that and help train the staff. Well, the first hurdle is cognitive. So can it be done? Because in Jamaica, people don't swim. It's not part of the culture. The pools are all for the tourists. Cricket, running, all part of the culture, not swimming. So, and then there was no way to get the children to the pool, and the very bad relationship between the police and the people that live in the ghettos. So the police picked up the children and brought them to the pool. So that was a cognitive hurdle. The second is a resource hurdle. So how can we get the funding to do this? So there was an old pool that had been defunct for years. And so the Rotary Club was working really hard to get the money to rehabilitate the pool. They had 25 days less, only had half the money. So I came back to Canada, and through the Rotary Club, we raised the money to open up this pool. So, can it be done? And then what are the resources? The next one is the motivational hurdle. So when things are really tough, as they were in Jamaica, for example, this was a ghetto, and there was a criminal who ran the ghetto, and how do we get him not to be part of this? And so part of the government grant was they trained people from the ghetto, which was fine, to do all of the refurbishment of the pool, but they didn't train them. So this was going on forever. I had to get the RFP, and it took me, I had to threaten to quit. I mean, because in Jamaica, everything happens really slowly. So we got RFP, 82 pages long, didn't list the work, didn't list the money. So it took me about a month to get that. And then the last hurdle is political. So if we didn't raise the money because the election brought in a different political party, if we didn't have that money by that specific time, then the people that voted for the current government would get the money, not the people who voted against the new government. So it's, can we do it? Do we have the resources to do it? Do we have the motivation to do it? And political. So right now, politically, it's not ripe, unfortunately, to stop people from texting and driving. And it can't, if it can be done with the designated driver program, it certainly can be done with texting and driving. But it's like seatbelts. Shakespeare said ripeness is all, meaning timing is everything. So we need, in tipping points, to increase that sense of urgency. And so it's called a burning platform. It really gets people to say, hey, this has to change, and this has to change now. So we have enough energy and enough resources to overcome all of those hurdles.
Well, I have to say that certainly applies in our industry, in real estate, lots of change afoot, and we need strong leaders to help take this industry forward. So I'm glad you're speaking today. That's wonderful. Well, today I've been speaking with Dr. Brad McRae. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And if you'd like more information on this topic or on Brad himself, you can go to bradmcrae.com.